All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jason Freeberg. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. Rory,
And I'm Rory. Yeah, I'm Rory Preddy. I'm super excited to be here. And I'm a developer advocate for Microsoft based out of South Africa.
And today we're going to talk about Red Hat's JBoss EAP on Azure App Service. Now, I hope it comes as no surprise to everybody, but Microsoft has been supporting the Java ecosystem and its developer community for quite a while now. We've been contributing directly to the Open JDK, and we're now providing builds of the Open JDK, starting with Java 11 and 16, and providing support for those binaries on Azure. Another example is Azure Spring Cloud, which provides a managed platform for hosting Spring Boot microservice applications. And we can't forget GitHub, which of course hosts millions of Java repositories and provides free CI/CD and vulnerability scans, not just for Java, but for other popular programming languages as well. Microsoft also publishes plugins for popular Java IDEs and dev tools, such as Maven, to meet Java developers where they are and easily integrate into their existing development workflows. And last but not least, teams across Microsoft continue to support popular Java projects and standards such as Quarkus and MicroProfile. Now, this figure might surprise some of you listening, but Microsoft has over 500,000 JVMs running across its different production products and services. And that number does not include any customer deployments on Azure. LinkedIn, for example, relies heavily on Java. The backend of Yammer is written in Java, and some popular Azure services, such as HD Insight and Databricks, also run on Java. And of course, we can't forget Minecraft, which now runs on Java 11. So that briefly covers how Microsoft uses and supports Java internally for its own products and services. But what about customer Java applications? What if you or your organization wants to migrate or modernize your Java apps onto Azure? Well, for that, you have a couple of different options depending on where you want to land from the control to productivity spectrum. So of course, Azure provides infrastructure as a service. You can deploy your Java apps onto virtual machines or virtual machine scale sets. And as you can probably guess by the name, scale sets, that service allows you to scale your deployment out to thousands of virtual machines. But as we all probably know, VMs come with their own, come with a higher level of management and configuration versus some other options that are out there. So if your organization leverages containers, you have a couple of more options. You can use the Kubernetes service on Azure, known as AKS, or you can use Azure Red Hat OpenShift, which is a managed platform jointly offered by Red Hat and Azure. Going up even farther to the productivity side of the line here, you have more services like Azure Spring Cloud that we talked about a little bit earlier, managed platform for Spring Boot microservice applications. And there's also Azure App Service. Both of these platforms allow you to deploy either code or a container. And today, I want to take a deeper dive into Azure App Service. Let's start with deployment, because that's often the first step in trying out a new service, is deploying your code and getting something running up in the cloud. So with App Service, you can deploy your application code. So for Java, something like a jar or a war, to a container that the platform will manage and update for you. On the other hand, if your organization does use containers, you can deploy a container image and the platform will run it just the same. App Service provides APIs, plugins, and extensions to deploy from the Azure CLI, IntelliJ, Eclipse, Maven, GitHub Actions, Jenkins, Azure DevOps, and probably more that I'm not even listing right now. From the deployment center in the portal, which is what we're looking at here on the right-hand side, if your code is in GitHub, Azure, or in a container registry, if you're using containers, the deployment center will help you set up a CI/CD pipeline to build and deploy your Java apps onto App Service. On the other hand, if you already have a CI/CD pipeline that you want to continue using with App Service, you can deploy your artifacts using the Azure CLI or the Maven plugins as part of that deployment pipeline. Now, one last feature I want to mention on the topic of deployment is App Service deployment slots. So deployment slots are independent staging environments where you can deploy a new version of your application or test configuration changes. And when your tests are completed, you can then swap that build into production. And as you do that, App Service will scale out the staging environment to match your production footprint before routing traffic to it. Now, once you've deployed your Java apps onto App Service, you can secure your site with a myriad of different networking features. You can deploy your site into a virtual network to secure its connections to other Azure resources, such as a database, a cache, or a messaging service. And then you can use private link, which we're seeing on the left side here, to isolate the application from any inbound connections from the public internet. So this way, your application is only surfaced to other services within the virtual network. And as you can imagine, that's great for any internal facing applications. If your organization requires even more network security, you can use the App Service Environment, or ACE for short. With an ACE, the entire App Service stack is dedicated to your subscription. So that means the file servers, the front ends, the workers that are actually running your applications, and all of the other roles involved in App Service are dedicated to your subscription. And you can deploy an App Service either with a VNet exposed IP address or with an internet accessible address. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Now, the App Service environment allows you to scale farther than a typical App Service deployment. And speaking of scaling, whether you're using the App Service environment or the multi-tenant version of App Service, you can set up auto scale rules based on things like HTTP traffic, CPU or memory utilization, or simply by the time of day if you want it to scale up during business hours and scale back down during off hours. Now, when you're scaled out to multiple instances, App Service's health check feature will reroute traffic away from any unhealthy instances. And if any of your instances remain unhealthy for too long, the platform will reboot those in an attempt to bring your applications back up. You can easily set up auto scale rules from the portal, which we're seeing right here. And we'll see more of this in Rory's demo in just a few minutes. Now, when your applications are in the cloud and they're auto scaling and handling thousands to millions of requests, monitoring becomes incredibly important. So thankfully, App Service integrates with Azure Monitor to provide a turnkey monitoring solution for your Java apps. And that means no code changes are required. You simply have to enable application insights from the Azure portal or the CLI, and then let App Service attach the monitoring agents for you. So when this is enabled, metrics will begin flowing into application insights. And then from there, you can watch live metrics, which we're seeing right here on the slide, or you can view an application map of your deployment, and we'll see more of that in Rory's demo. And you can also set up alerts for scenarios like slow or failing requests, and then use App Insights to dig into the data to diagnose and solve the problem. Now, once you've deployed your application, you've secured it with a virtual network, scaled it out, and set up monitoring, you can also save with App Service. App Service has reserved instance pricing, which allows you to make a 1 or 3 year commitment to save 35% to 55% respectively. You can still scale beyond your reserved instances, and you'll just be billed at the pay-as-you-go rate for any usage beyond your reserved instances. Now, App Service has supported Java since 2014. So you can deploy applications with an embedded servlet, such as a Spring Boot, MicroProfile, Quarkus, or an application from other frameworks. Or if your application runs on Tomcat, you can deploy your WAR applications to the Tomcat runtime, also offered on App Service. So over the years, our Java customers have said that they wanted a similar hosting option that they have for their embedded servlet and Tomcat applications for their Java EE applications as well. So I'm excited to share that we've partnered with Red Hat to offer JBoss EAP on Azure App Service. So this means that all of the features I mentioned earlier, like scaling, monitoring, network security, reserved instance pricing, all of those features apply to JBoss EAP as well, since it's being offered as part of the App Service platform. So this means whether you're deploying a jar, WAR, or an EAR application, we have purpose-built deployment APIs to deliver your artifacts from the tools we see here and the tools I mentioned earlier, and then deliver those artifacts onto JBoss on App Service. And then from there, you can leverage all the same deployment-related features I mentioned earlier, like deployment slots, or then you can use the deployment center to set up a CI/CD pipeline. Now, let me be clear, this is a joint offering from Red Hat and Azure. So that means you'll get full stack support from both companies. If you run into an issue or you have a question, you can submit a support case with either company, and behind the scenes, the support engineers from Azure and Red Hat will collaborate to resolve your case. All JBoss sites on App Service are automatically enrolled into this joint support program. And starting August 1st, a support fee will be applied to any JBoss sites running on App Service. So one more feature of JBoss on App Service is that you can allow the platform to update your JBoss server for you if you want to allow it to do that. On the other hand, if you want to handle that on your own terms, you can pin to a specific version of Java and a specific version of JBoss, and then update on your own terms when you want to do that. That's another scenario where you can use the deployment slots feature that I mentioned earlier to upgrade to the latest version of JBoss and test that your application is working well there, and then swap that new version into production when you've confirmed that everything's working right. Now, scaling. I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to mention it again. You can auto scale your JBoss applications on App Service using all of those metrics I mentioned earlier, like traffic, CPU, memory utilization, or just the time of day. Now, you can also view the application map. The application insights monitoring solution that I mentioned earlier also applies to JBoss on App Service. And you'll see more of this in Rory's demo, which is actually a great segue into Rory's demo. So now I'm going to hand it off to Rory to take us through a demo of JBoss on App Service.
Thank you, Jason. What a great slideshow. Let me just share my screen. Let me do the dance of can you see me, can you hear me? And I am sharing my screen. Great, everything looks great. So we've got some great documentation. We're going to share the links for you, but this is one of the documentation that the team that I'm from, the Java Advocates, actually put together to give you that experience. It's the deploy a Java EE, Jakarta EE application to JBoss EAP. You can go download it right now. And in there, we actually create a nice little service here that gives you the area of a continent or a country. You can see there, I'm going to hit that there, and it's going to return back an African country. Now, in the spirit of live demos, let's break this. I'm going to hit this with 100 sessions right now in front of you live, and I'm going to do that on the Azure portal. So you can see here, I've got my Azure portal. I'm going to open up the CLI, and I've got my scaling set up that if I hit more than 5 requests, scale up request count, my server count to 2. It's currently 1. And then scale down after a minute if I don't have any traffic. So let's open up Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell is an incredible place to actually do load balance because it's in the server that you're actually running on. It's like in your area there. So I'm going to open up a Cloud Shell, and then I'm going to use a curl to actually hit that little service there 100 times in like a couple of seconds. And we're going to scale up. By that time, also, I'm going to go through what I did and the scale settings and look at how the distributed monitoring actually works. So watch how fast this is. SH, and I've got a little script there. And I'm going to hit it 100 times. That never gets old. Done. We're going to come back there, and we're going to see the scale. And what we're looking for is we did more than 5 requests. We're going to scale up, and we want that pay-as-you-go for the scale down. So when the requests come down. So let's look at exactly the project that I created there. Now, to do that, I'm going to show you the project that you're going to clone as part of the Microsoft Learn module. But I'm not going to really clone it locally. I'm going to clone it in code spaces because we're advocates and we like to do things dangerously. So I've got the code spaces there. I'm going to open the code spaces there. It says preparing your code spaces. Now, nice thing about code spaces, the general availability will be between July and September, sometime during then, but it is going to be made available. And it's so powerful. You can see at the bottom there also open in Visual Studio Code. I could open it locally in remote containers, but there it's done there. And over here, you can see that's the continent setup that I've got here. Get the path of area continents, and we got Africa. And what it does there, it gets a listing from that service there. Let's control click there. Find by ID continent in the country service. So if we go into the actual controllers, let's go in there into country service, you'll see there that it actually calls a persistence manager called JPA World Data Source PU. Now I've set that up, but how I've set that is the novelty of how we're going to scale, because I can't set that up on every instance I'm going to scale. I actually want to set that up. I want the instance to set it up itself. So what I do there is that I set up under my, let's go in there, under my resources, I've got a little JPA data source there. I point it to a MySQL database there, but then I have a script that I set up in the server, each server that will run, that script then will actually go in and set itself up though. So let's go into web app, and you can see here, this is a script that we actually give to JBoss instance to run itself, and it will then go set up the JPA world data source. So every server, every time it loads, scales up or scales down, it's going to know how to actually reconnect to the database. The next thing I want to do is I want to set up the app server settings to have my URL. Now I've got a database running there. So I just set up the connection URL and the username and password in my actual app server settings. So you can see here, this is the little scale settings that we had here. If I go into the application, I want to show you the actual server that I've set up. Now I've got a really powerful server, P3v3. 32 gigs of RAM, 8 CPUs, I want to have its children. It's just extraordinary. So let's just click here again. Oh, there we go. And then on scale up, so that was scale out for the settings to auto scale, but the scale up, you can see here, I'm on the production workloads here, and I'm on the P3v3 servers there. And it gives me 32 gigs of CPU memory and 8 CPUs. And it's just power. But part of this also here is the fact that I get autoscale, and also I get the staging slots, what Jason mentioned, and I get to set up my configuration for my manual app settings. Remember what I said there? You can use Key Vault, but you can also set up your configuration to point to your MySQL database. So I've got a MySQL database, and while we're talking, our server's scaling in the background. So if this live demo goes well, everything should be there. So I've got my settings there. I've got my MySQL connection URL, my password, and my user. And that'll be every server that is scaled up there will actually pick up those settings. Let's go check our database now that we're using here. And the database is also really special. What the database actually uses is a flexible server. So we've just launched MySQL flexible servers. And this is a burstable server that costs like pennies a day to run. And when you need it, it can actually scale out itself and take that kind of that pent up money that you've saved when it didn't need to scale, and then it gives it back to you. So here's my server here, and that's the server that we set up for the app settings. And that server here, you'll see there is running very smoothly, IO percentage, and DB connections. And then you can see there, wow, we got some queries there. We got 200 queries that we just hit there. And if I go into, let's go into there, the actual size of it here, you can see burstable B1 MS, and this is under preview. And if I can go in there, you can scale up to burstable or general purpose. And then it's only costing me $19. Look at that price, Jason, $19 a month to actually run that thing. And it's a really powerful server that I've got there. So that's the SQL server. And you can see and over 30 days, it's been stable. I've been running this demo for 30 days there. Let's go then now to see the app service insights. Now, we know that we scaled up. We know we are scaling up there. Let's see if we can actually see any insights on our actual instance there to see, did we scale up? What is our performance like? What are our queries like for our end-to-end monitoring? So I'm going to go into application insights here, and then I'm going to go into application map. So as I click through here, remember this is enabled by default on your server. You don't have to actually set up anything. So I'm going to go into my application map, and now I've got my lovely little spider web there that I've got there. And you can see there, I've got my Jakarta EE application that we did there, and it's calling the World SQL database, which is my area continent database there. And I've got 221 calls that I've done in the last hour. Now let's go in the last 30 minutes, and you can see there, let's go there. 161 calls. And that's exactly what we just did now as part of that. So if I go into the, let's go into my instance here, we're looking for the area continent. There we go. The slowest requests and 6 milliseconds. That's super fast. Let's go into that. Now we can see, and we can drill down into each one of these, and we can also see the dependencies, the database dependencies. So I want to see the samples here for area continent. So I'm going to click on samples here, and I can actually see the rest samples there taking 6 milliseconds. What I'm looking for is how fast did my database take, my flexible database here. And now I'm going to show you the end-to-end transaction details for that for one of those instances there. Look how incredible that is. Now I can actually go in to each one of those calls there and say, what was my slowest point of that transaction? Was it my database or was it my REST call? And you can see there, my actual REST call took 5 milliseconds and my database 2 milliseconds. I can prove categorically to people now that whether my database or my transactions there. And I can even go into each one of these and see my end-to-end user flows for, let's just wait for there for a second. So you can actually go into the user flows. I won't go through there just yet, but how the user engaged with that transaction, at what timing and what part of the transaction did he actually call. This is out of the box. I didn't have to set up anything there, and I just deployed it there. So while this is happening, let's actually look at exactly what happened with the order scale. Now, I'm going to go back to my JBoss settings here, and let's get out of application insights. Now, I've timed it perfectly, and I've done this demo a few times on 5 minutes. So ideally, everything's running perfectly there on my app scaling, my scale out. I shouldn't have lost, you saw there was no HTTP 5xx settings there. And we can go into our run history. So let's just go refresh there. We can actually watch it scale in real time then, which is great. We can go into our run history. And you'll see there on the first hour there, we should have, there's an observed instance count, order scale up already happened. Scale up happened, scale down happened, live on air. And yeah, now you can actually get hooks into your DevOps processes here. And you can actually go in and see the scale settings that actually triggered it though. And I'm so confident in this that I did it live on air. Jason, I'm going to give it back to you. I've showed you application insights, I've showed you order scale, and I've showed you the demo that you can actually do. Back to you, Jason.
Awesome. Thank you, Rory. I love that demo. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So a couple more notes before we wrap up today. So JBoss on App Service is currently in public preview. So if you want to go and try out the same things Rory did, you can go and do that today in the portal, create a JBoss site. It will be generally available on June 23rd, so just right around the corner later this month. Again, this is a jointly supported offering by Red Hat and Azure. We talked about the joint support model a little bit ago, and the billing for that will go into effect on August 1st. Now, this is going to be available, JBoss on App Service, on the premium v3 and isolated v2 app service plan types. So during Rory's demo, he mentioned he was running on the P3 v3, that beastly VM. There's also a premium 1 v3 and a premium 2 v3 if you want to go down a little bit, if you don't need so many resources. And then isolated v2, that's the latest version of the app service environment that we talked about earlier, the dedicated single tenant version of app service. All of this is eligible for reserved instance pricing, so you can save up to 55% on your hosting bill if you make that 3-year commitment. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can email us at javaonappservice@microsoft.com. And before we wrap up, just a couple more points. There are other options for running JBoss on Azure. So there are jointly developed deployment templates for VMs and VMSS that have been developed by Red Hat and Azure. So if you want to deploy JBoss onto VMs, you have that option. Just one note is that that is a bring your own subscription model. So you will have to secure a subscription to run that. The other option is Azure Red Hat OpenShift, jointly supported offering similar to App Service, JBoss on App Service. And of course, you can run JBoss applications on Arrow as well. And now JBoss on App Service, we talked about that all today, so I don't think we need to go over that again. Now, if you want to try out the same content that Rory did, and I suggest that you guys do, you can go to that top right QR code, and that will take you to a Microsoft Learn module that covers how to deploy and get started with JBoss on App Service. And then the bottom right QR code will take you to a learning path. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Rory, but that's for JBoss across Azure. So if you want to learn more about Java on Azure than just JBoss and App Service, you can go to that bottom right QR code. Okay. So that wraps it up for today. And so I think we've got some extra time here for the Q&A. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something and hope you had fun.
Do you want to go to the next slide there? We've got some really great links that we can give them. And we've got some questions coming in right now. So the first question, Jason, I'll ask is, if I have to choose between MS Managed updates of JBoss EAP, how fast will a new release of EAP make to Azure?
So we have a system with Red Hat where when new versions of JBoss are published, they send an alert over to our system, and then that gets picked up in our next release. So we have deployments that roll out with updates for App Service, and so the new versions of JBoss will go in with those deployments. So the upshot is it can be most up to 4 to 6 weeks after the new versions of JBoss are published when they would be available on App Service.
Thank you so much. Next question. How are JBoss EAP license and support handled by Microsoft? Is there a difference with existing workloads on-premise and new installs on Azure?
So for license and support, there's nothing to do on the customer side for App Service. You just have to go into the portal or the CLI, create a JBoss site on App Service. And then behind the scenes, your sites are automatically enrolled in that joint support program. So you can submit those support cases, like I mentioned, and then behind the scenes, if the Azure support, for example, needs assistance from Red Hat, then as long as you, the customer, grant permission, then Azure will engage with Red Hat to resolve those issues. And starting on August 1st, that's when you'll start to see a billing update for that joint support in your Azure bills.
Thank you. Final question. It looks like there is only one more question. JBoss App Services uses containers to scale up or down, or is it just the JVM scaling those? So we are going to have to tell them a little bit about the back end though. Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, so under the hood, when you deploy your JBoss applications onto JBoss on App Service, under the hood, we're running containers. And so when you deploy your code, we pull that down. In the case of a WAR file, we unzip it, load it onto JBoss. And as you scale out, like in Rory's demo, if you set up scale rules like he did, that means he had 2 containers. So you're scaling out horizontally behind a load balancer. So you can scale as far as 30 instances now, I think with PV3. And as you do that, then the load balancer will round robin your requests to those different instances. Hope that answers this question.
That was a very good answer. Thanks, thanks everyone. We're out of questions now. Thank you so much, Jason. You can go to the Java Learn paths there, JBoss and Azure, Java module on MS Learn, and also the full learning path. And if you want to start with the Red Hat JBoss on virtual machines, you have that there also. Thanks, everyone. And you can follow us on Twitter also at Rory Preddy. And Jason, what's your Twitter handle?
Mine's at Jason Freeberg.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.